The town hall erupted in laughter as Richard Harrington mockingly mimicked sign language, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with the worn jacket of the 75-year-old deaf veteran who had dared to question his bridge design. Jack Thompson sat perfectly still, his weather hands folded on the table. After surviving Vietnam and losing his hearing from a grenade explosion, he had developed an unshakable patience. For 40 years, he had built bridges across America before retiring to this small town. Today, he had spotted a critical flaw in the municipal bridge proposal that no one else seemed to notice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced a room filled with engineers and town officials, "our deaf friend here thinks he understands structural engineering better than someone with a master's degree from Stanford." He gestured toward Jack's notepad where neat calculations were written in precise handwriting. Jack reached for his small whiteboard, writing quickly, "The soil composition will cause uneven settling on the north support." Richard's face twisted into an exaggerated expression of mock surprise. "Oh, the soil composition," he exclaimed, turning to ensure everyone could appreciate his performance. "Maybe we should give him an honorary engineering degree, since he clearly knows more than our entire team with their combined 60 years of education." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. Some officials looked away, embarrassed by the spectacle. Others, particularly the younger engineers on Richard's team, smiled discreetly, pleased to see the old man put in his place. Jack remained composed, his military bearing evident despite his age. His steel blue eyes held Richard's gaze without flinching. There was something in that steady look that might give a more perceptive man pause. Not the resignation of someone accepting humiliation, but the calm of someone who had faced far worse than an arrogant bureaucrat. "If you want to keep your position as community consultant," Richard continued, approaching Jack with a cold smile, "I suggest you stick to whatever his deaf veterans do in retirement and leave the important decisions to qualified professionals." The silence in the room was palpable. Several veterans present looked down at their hands, uncomfortable with the disrespect being shown to one of their own. "Understood, sir." Jack signed, his movements deliberately slow, so that Richard could appreciate the military formality. Then he simply gathered his notes and slipped them into his worn leather portfolio. Richard smiled victoriously. "Now that we've resolved this hierarchy issue, can we continue? We have a tight schedule to maintain." The meeting proceeded with Richard dominating the conversation, pointing to charts and schedules on his tablet as he explained changes that would save time and money. No one noticed Jack discreetly typing a message on his old flip phone. As the presentation concluded, Richard's phone chimed. Frowning, he read the message, his face visibly paling. "Emergency meeting with the company owner in 15 minutes, he announced tensely. "Thomas J. Thompson is coming to personally assess our progress." A murmur ran through the group. Thomas J. Thompson was a reclusive owner of Horizon Municipal Engineering, rarely seen at project meetings. His presence meant something extremely important or extremely problematic. Richard nervously adjusted his tie, attempting to project confidence. "Get everything ready. I want this place spotless." As everyone rushed about, no one noticed a slight smile on Jack's face. No one saw him quietly slip out of the conference room and walk calmly toward the parking lot. No one imagined that behind the simple appearance of a deaf veteran lay a story that was about to turn the meeting and Richard Harrington's career upside down. In the conference room, Richard paced nervously, checking his watch every few minutes while his team pretended to review documents they already knew by heart. "Is he coming because of the budget cuts I approved?" Richard whispered to his assistant. "Make sure he understands we saved almost $500,000 on foundation materials." "I don't know, sir," replied the assistant, equally nervous. The message just said he needed to evaluate the project personally. Outside, Jack Thompson approached his car, a modest sedan parked far from the executive area. He opened the trunk and removed a garment bag. With practiced efficiency, he changed from his worn jacket into a perfectly tailored navy suit. From a leather case, he took out a sleek tablet and a pair of high-end hearing aids. Finally, he retrieved an elegant silver-tipped cane and a leather portfolio embossed with the Horizon Company logo. The transformation was subtle but profound. His posture, already straight from decades of military discipline, now carried an unmistakable air of authority. The simple deaf veteran had vanished, replaced by someone altogether different. Meanwhile, in the conference room, tension mounted with each passing minute. Veterans who had attended to support the community project whispered among themselves, disturbed by how Jack had been treated. "That was uncalled for," muttered Frank, a former Army sergeant. Thompson served with distinction in Vietnam. Purple Heart and Silver Star. Lost his hearing saving his unit. "Harrington's always been like that," another replied. "Thinks degrees matter more than experience." "Someone should report how he treated Jack," said a third. "That kind of disrespect shouldn't be tolerated." Little did they know that their concerns were about to be addressed in a way none of them could have anticipated. "He's here," someone called from the window, and everyone turned to see a sleek black SUV pull into the reserved parking space. Richard straightened his tie one last time and hurried to the entrance, a rehearsed smile plastered across his face. The driver's door opened first, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. Clearly security. Then the rear door opened. Richard extended his hand. "Mr. Thompson, what an honor. We're perfectly on schedule," and his voice died as he recognized a man emerging from a vehicle. Richard froze, his welcoming expression morphing into confusion as he stared at the familiar face. You're Thomas Jack Thompson," the man said clearly, using both his voice and sign language simultaneously. "Owner of Horizon Municipal Engineering." His speech had the distinctive pattern of someone who learned to speak after becoming deaf, but his words were perfectly understandable. Richard blinked several times, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "But you're the deaf man from the meeting, the one you publicly mocked and humiliated?" Thomas completed the sentence, his expression calm but unyielding. "Yes, that would be me." A deathly silence fell over the assembled group. Richard turned pale, his face now whiter than the architectural plans clutched in his trembling hands. "Mr. Thompson," one of Richard's team stepped forward. "There must have been some misunderstanding. Mr. Harrington didn't know I was the owner," Thomas finished, signing simultaneously. "That's exactly the point. Nobody knew because I didn't want them to know." Thomas looked around at the officials and engineers who were now gathering at a respectful distance, watching the unfolding scene with growing interest. 20 years ago, I founded Horizon with a promise to build infrastructure that serves communities, not just looks good on paper," Thomas continued. "But I noticed that over time, we began to lose touch with what happens on the ground. So with every new major project, I spend the first few weeks working incognito. I trade my suit for casual clothes and use my middle name." Richard looked like he might faint. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea. If I had known..." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Thomas interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me with respect. But because you thought I was just a deaf veteran, you felt entitled to mock me in public." An older man with silver hair stepped forward. He was Bill Mercer, the project supervisor who had overseen Horizon's work for decades. "Mr. T," he said familiarly, "you could have warned me you were doing your special inspection again." Thomas smiled for the first time. "And miss a chance to see how things really work. Bill, you know that defeats the purpose." Bill nodded, turning to Richard with an expression that mixed disappointment and something close to satisfaction. "I've known Thomas for 30 years. We served together in Vietnam before he started the company. He always says that a bridge is only as strong as its weakest support, and a company is only as good as how it treats its most vulnerable stakeholder." Thomas adjusted his hearing aids, a subtle but effective completion of his transformation from the simple deaf veteran to the commanding presence he now projected. Several veterans who had witnessed Jack's humiliation earlier couldn't hide their smiles. Some whispered among themselves. Others just watched with expressions that clearly said, "Now things are going to get interesting." Richard attempted a desperate recovery. "Mr. Thompson, if you will give me the opportunity to explain my vision for this project." "Your vision?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "The same vision that completely ignored a warning about structural flaws in the North support? The same vision that prioritized cost-cutting over safety?" He motioned to Bill, who stepped forward with a folder. "I've already asked Bill to review in detail concerns I raised this morning," Thomas continued. We've discovered that the soil samples already show exactly the instability I indicated. He turned to the group of engineers. I want a full meeting in 15 minutes in the main conference room. Bring all the blueprints, soil analyses, and technical decisions made in the last 3 months. As the group quickly dispersed, Thomas took a step toward Richard, lowering his voice. You know what's most ironic, Mr. Harrington? If you had simply listened to the deaf veteran, you would have impressed the owner of the company with your humility and collaboration. Instead, Thomas left the sentence hanging, adjusting the silver watch that had been hidden under the sleeve of his worn jacket earlier. Richard stood motionless as Thomas walked away toward the conference room, several officials now rushing to follow him. In the eyes of the arrogant planner, there was no longer disdain or superiority, only the pure terror of someone who realizes he has built his own downfall on foundations of prejudice and arrogance. And as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the municipal center, a truth emerged clearer than the blueprint spread across the conference table. The humiliation Richard had planted that morning was sprouting rapidly, growing into an imposing structure that would soon crush his career completely. The veterans who had witnessed both the morning's mockery and the afternoon's revelation exchanged knowing glances. One of them, a former Marine, summed it up perfectly. In the Corps, we learned quickly that rank doesn't make you right. Seems like our friend Richard is about to learn that lesson the hard way. In the main conference room of Horizon Municipal Engineering, the silence was absolute. On one side sat Richard Harrington and his visibly uncomfortable team. On the other, Thomas Thompson, now in his element as company owner, accompanied by Bill and 2 technical auditors. Let's get right to the point, Thomas began calmly, both speaking and signing. Why were my observations about the North support not only ignored but ridiculed? Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, there was a misunderstanding. I was just reinforcing the chain of command and... Chain of command? Thomas interrupted, grabbing his tablet. Our company manual clearly states, any stakeholder, regardless of position or function, has a duty to report possible structural concerns. Thomas slid his finger across the screen, and our meeting recordings capture audio. With a tap, Richard's arrogant voice filled the room. Here we work with science and education, not with the intuition of a deaf old man who probably can't even read a blueprint properly. Richard loosened his tie, suffocated by his own recorded arrogance. In the last 2 hours, Thomas continued, projecting documents onto the wall. We reviewed all of your engineering decisions. An auditor stood up. We found 11 safety violations. The most serious one is about the North Support Foundation. We also identified unauthorized material substitutions and manipulation of soil test reports. Richard turned pale. I can explain. An engineer on the team couldn't take the pressure. Mr. Thompson, several of us warned Mr. Harrington about these problems. He insisted that the calculations were correct and that the savings were necessary. Necessary for what? Thomas asked. For the end-of-project bonus. Another engineer confessed. If we saved over $500,000, we'd all get a substantial bonus. Richard stood up abruptly. This is a conspiracy. I'm a respected professional with a master's degree from Stanford. I'm not going to let a bunch of... Of what? Thomas asked sharply. Deaf people? Veterans? Finish your thought. The silence was deafening. Richard collapsed into his chair, defeated. Thomas motioned to Bill, who handed him a folder. Richard opened it with trembling hands. It was his termination letter. Am I being fired? He asked incredulously. I have 2 options for you, Thomas replied. Option 1. Termination for cause with civil proceeding for negligence and falsification. Your license will be reviewed by the board. Richard swallowed hard. Option 2. Voluntary departure. In exchange, you will return all bonuses and work 6 months as a volunteer in our training program for disabled veterans interested in engineering and construction. 5 minutes to decide, Thomas added. In the meantime, let's gather everyone outside. I think they deserve an explanation. In the central courtyard, the town officials and project team gathered curiously. Thomas climbed onto a small platform. Good afternoon, he began, signing as he spoke. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Jack Thompson, founder of Horizon. Some of you know me as Jack, the deaf veteran from this morning's meeting. Surprised looks and smiles of understanding appeared among the crowd. I'm here for two reasons, Thomas continued. First, to announce that Richard Harrington is no longer part of the Horizon Bridge project. A stunned silence followed, then spontaneous applause which Thomas silenced with a gesture. The second reason is more important. At Horizon, we don't just build bridges between places. We build bridges between people. It doesn't matter if you have a PhD or learn through experience. Your knowledge is valuable. Your voice deserves to be heard. The conference room door opened, and Richard emerged carrying his belongings. His gait was defeated, his shoulders slumped. As he passed through the crowd, he faced a corridor of stairs, not mocking, but something perhaps more painful. Pure pity. Thomas watched as Richard reached his car. Before getting in, their eyes met, a brief nod of recognition. Not of true regret, but of someone who finally understood the gulf between authority and respect. Bill approached Thomas. Which option did he choose? Thomas smiled slightly. Surprisingly, voluntary training. There's hope even for the most difficult cases. Bill shook his head. You've always seen beyond appearances. That's why you built this company from the ground up. Thomas gazed at the project site, where workers were reviewing the revised plans with renewed energy. True engineering isn't just about building structures, Bill. It's about tearing down invisible barriers that prevent talented people from being heard. 6 months later, the Horizon Municipal Bridge stood completed. Its foundations reinforced exactly where Thomas had warned of problems. In the company's training center, a group of disabled veterans were receiving engineering instruction. Among the teachers, surprisingly, was Richard Harrington. Thinner, humbler, but with a different look in his eyes as he patiently used sign language to explain structural principles to a deaf Navy veteran. I thought it would be punishment, Richard later confessed to Thomas. But these veterans see solutions that aren't in textbooks. I've learned more from them than they've learned from me. Thomas nodded. It's amazing what we discover when we stop judging by appearances, isn't it? As Thomas watched Richard work with the veterans, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had built more than bridges and buildings. He had built a legacy of dignity and respect that transcended disabilities and prejudices. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on how we judge others by appearances, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of how others perceive you? How did you respond? Your experiences might help someone facing similar challenges today. Remember, respect isn't about treating everyone the same. It's about valuing each person's unique contribution.